At exactly 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by the blare of an alarm, tires screeching outside, and flashes of blue and red lights dancing across my bedroom walls. My heart pounded as I stumbled to the window, only to witness a scene that could have been ripped straight from a Hollywood blockbuster. Armed officers swarming the street with surgical precision, shouting orders into their radios. But that wasn't the part that knocked the wind out of me. My Jeep, the very one I had locked and parked outside per detailed instructions from the local police task force, had vanished. Gone. In its place stood a glaring orange parking cone with a sticky note slapped on it that read, "Code violation, HOA confiscated." I didn't know whether to break down laughing, scream at the top of my lungs, or cry at the absurdity. Karen from the HOA had taken it upon herself to cut the lock off a law enforcement vehicle and tow it away like it was an old mattress left on the curb. She had no idea she had just derailed months of surveillance work. Now, federal agents were standing on my doorstep, demanding to know the whereabouts of the Jeep. And I was faced with the surreal task of explaining that our neighborhood HOA president had essentially stolen government property. When I moved into Willow Creek Estates, I was hoping for a fresh chapter. After years serving overseas and bouncing from city to city, I wanted stability. A peaceful neighborhood, a backyard for my dog, a garage big enough to work on motorcycles. And for the first few weeks, it was everything I had hoped for. Friendly neighbors waved, kids played in the cul-de-sac, and the air smelled like barbecue and mulch. But peace has one sworn enemy. Linda Farthington, president of the HOA. Though most of us called her Karen Supreme, she didn't just enforce the rules, she was the rules. If your grass grew half an inch too long, expect a fine on your doorstep. Leave up your Halloween lights past October 31st, written warning. And if you drove something like my rugged, black Jeep with tactical military plating and reinforced bumpers, apparently, you were guilty of a visual felony. The first time Karen laid eyes on my Jeep, her lips tightened into a line so thin they nearly disappeared. "That doesn't belong in this neighborhood," she said, glaring at it like it had insulted her personally. "Looks like it escaped from a demolition derby." I tried to stay polite and explained that the Jeep was part of my consulting role with law enforcement. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "Nice story, soldier boy. Next time, get a Honda like everyone else." From that moment, she was on a mission. Every week, I'd receive a passive-aggressive note complaining about unauthorized modifications, overly tactical appearance, and my personal favorite, parking intimidation. Who knew a parked vehicle could be accused of psychological warfare? What Karen didn't realize, because she was too busy policing flower beds and mailbox paint, was that the Jeep had been outfitted with covert surveillance equipment. A federal task force had approached me, asking to use the vehicle as a fixed observation post in a sting operation aimed at dismantling a drug network hiding in our picture-perfect community. Hidden cameras, GPS trackers, digital recorders. The Jeep was essentially a mobile spy unit, and its aggressive look made it the perfect camouflage. It blended in just enough to avoid suspicion from those being watched. Ironically, Karen's hatred for the Jeep was part of why it was selected in the first place. Of course, I didn't broadcast any of this to the neighbors. The fewer who knew, the better. I followed every instruction to the letter: keep it parked visibly out front, change its angle occasionally, and absolutely never move it without notifying the task force. I even added a heavy-duty security lock to the front wheel to make it clear the vehicle wasn't abandoned junk. None of that mattered to Karen. The sight of that wheel lock must have sent her into a frenzy of self-righteous authority. She reported the Jeep not once, not twice, but 5 times, each time claiming it was an abandoned nuisance. I explained it wasn't. I showed her it was on my property, legally parked, but she was determined to handle what she called a community hazard. Then one day, while I was out running errands, she acted. Karen hired a private tow truck, the kind that clearly doesn't ask too many questions. But before the truck arrived, she marched up to the Jeep with bolt cutters and sliced through the lock like she was breaching a military base. My neighbor Rick, 2 doors down and always glued to his porch with his Ring camera rolling 24/7, caught the whole thing on video. In the footage, Karen grins smugly into the camera after cutting the lock and says, "One less eyesore to deal with." By the time I got back, the Jeep was gone. My first thought was that it had been stolen. Then I saw the Connie a broken bar and the note. I knocked on Karen's door. No answer. Instead, I got a formal email stating that the HOA had relocated the non-compliant vehicle to maintain visual harmony and uphold community standards. It was so outlandish I almost laughed until I remembered what was inside the Jeep. I immediately contacted the task force. They weren't amused. Within half an hour, agents were on my doorstep, demanding answers, and by the time I showed them the footage, the color had drained from their faces. Officer Melendez stared at the video, his face going pale. "She cut the lock and had it towed?" he asked. His voice clipped. I nodded, sweating. "She didn't ask anything, I just did it." "That's tampering with federal surveillance equipment," he said, tone hardening. "That's obstruction, minimum." The shift in energy was instant. Annoyance turned to alarm. The agents sprang into action, initiating an emergency retrieval order. But there was one massive problem. We had no idea where Karen had taken the Jeep. They checked every toll lot in the area. Nothing, which meant she hadn't used an official service. She'd stashed it somewhere private, off record, probably illegal. And the surveillance op? Cancelled. The suspects had caught wind something was off and scattered. Months of work all blown apart by an HOA president with a vendetta against rugged vehicles. So there I stood, at 3:17 a.m., watching federal agents scramble to salvage a blown operation, suspects on the run, and Karen a broken bar gone. She had no clue what she'd just done, but when the consequences finally landed, she'd wish all she did was leave a nasty note about my grass. The next morning, my phone buzzed. "Melendez, we found the Jeep. You're going to want to see this." My stomach flipped. I threw on a hoodie and bolted out the door. He arrived in an unmarked SUV, didn't say a word, just motioned for me to get in. From his clenched jaw, I could tell this wasn't going to be routine. We drove 10 minutes down winding roads until we reached a rusted gate behind an old home maintenance shed I'd never noticed before. Melendez walked up to the keypad, then pointed to the open padlock dangling from it like someone had forgotten to finish a crime. Behind the gate was a fenced-off patch of overgrown land filled with traffic cones, tarps, and 3 other vehicles stickers peeled off, parking tickets flapping in the wind. And there was my Jeep, scratched, muddy, crooked, like someone had dragged it in and dumped it. The side mirror was cracked, the small black surveillance case, gutted. I just stood there, silent, as Melendez muttered a string of curses and snapped photos. "This isn't a tow lot," he said, kicking a con aside. "This is a private junkyard. She's running a damn impound out of a utility shed." I walked around my Jeep, heart sinking. Scuff marks on the wheel wells, mud jammed into the suspension. Someone had even tried to pry open the glove box with a screwdriver. It felt like seeing a crime scene at a funeral. Melendez called for backup and a federal evidence team, and then, as if summoned by the universe, Karen arrived, clicking through the gravel in heels like she was showing up to a bake sale. "Oh, you found it," she chirped. "I was going to notify you. I assumed the HOA was within its rights to a ma'am." Melendez cut her off, stepped away from the vehicle. She blinked, confused. "Excuse me? I am the HOA president. I have full authority to you removed federal surveillance property from an active operation," he snapped. "Do you understand how serious that is?" Her expression twisted into an arrogant smirk. "Oh, please." That thing was an eyesore. It looked abandoned. I thought I was doing everyone a favor. She genuinely expected thanks. Melendez motioned to another officer. "Take her in." Karen didn't go quietly. As they led her away, she shouted about saving the neighborhood, doing what no one else would, and cleaning up the streets. Every word buried her deeper. Melendez turned to me. "You got footage of when she towed it?" I pulled out my phone and opened the video Rick, my neighbor with the ever-recording ring, had given me. The footage was damning. Karen, in broad daylight, walking up with bolt cutters. Snip, wheel lock gone. A sketchy, unmarked tow truck rolled up. She laughed as the Jeep was dragged away. Melendez just shook his head. That laugh's going to be the end of her. By day's end, the task force had it all: a video proof, timeline, witness statements, now a backyard chop shop masquerading as HOA enforcement. And just when I thought it couldn't get weirder, Rick strolled up with a lawn chair and a cooler like it was game day. "So," he said, cracking open a soda, You wanna tell her she just messed with the feds, or should I post it on Facebook first? Turns out, Rick had receipts. He'd archived everything: Karen's letters, her tirades at home meetings, her Facebook rants about cleaning up eyesores one rusty heap at a time. He handed over screenshots and clips like he was donating to a criminal history museum. I always knew she'd implode, Rick said, grinning. Didn't think she'd do it by stealing a government vehicle. The best part? The hoe had no clue. Karen hadn't called a vote, hadn't filed a single form. This was all her one-woman crusade, fueled by ego and a lust for control. When word got out, reactions ranged from shocked to celebratory. One neighbor brought out cupcakes frosted in red and blue, shaped like tiny tow trucks. That evening, my phone rang. At 13:02, I got a call from Detective Sasha Lynn, the lead on the task force. Her tone was composed, but sharp enough to cut glass. "We're evaluating charges," she said. "Tampering with federal property, interfering with an active surveillance operation, possibly obstruction of justice." Her HO title doesn't shield her from any of it. I asked what the next steps were. "Once we finish processing the damage and reviewing all the footage, we're handing everything over to the DA. In the meantime, you might want to brace yourself if people like her don't go down quietly." She was right. The very next day, a notice was taped to every front door in the neighborhood. Karen had called an emergency home meeting, not to apologize, not to explain, but to justify herself. According to the flyer, she planned to clarify recent misunderstandings regarding community safety and federal overreach. The audacity was next level. She was trying to cast herself as the victim, and she hadn't even seen the full extent of the evidence yet. But what Karen didn't realize was that the noose was already tightening, and this time, she wouldn't be holding the gavel. She'd be in the hot seat, facing not just irritated neighbors, but lawyers, officers, and a stack of subpoenas. The emergency home meeting was set for Friday evening, and by the time it started, the community center was packed, not just with residents, but with reporters, legal observers, and a few stone-faced individuals in dark suits who definitely weren't there for the free cookies. The energy in the room buzzed with anticipation. Everyone wanted to know what Karen Farthing, the once untouchable queen of HO drama, was going to say. She arrived 15 minutes late, of course, wearing a bright red blazer like she was hosting Wheel of Fortune, not facing down potential federal charges. Clipboard in hand and smug smile locked in place, she made her way to the front, nodded to the board stiffly seated behind the table, and tapped the microphone twice like she was preparing for a TED Talk. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, voice syrupy sweet. "I want to address the recent incident involving the removal of an illegally parked, unregistered vehicle from our street. There's been a great deal of confusion, misinformation, and frankly a hysteria around this event." Someone in the back snorted, "Probably Rick." Karen pressed on undeterred. "As your HO president, I take community safety and our aesthetic standards very seriously. When I saw a clearly abandoned Jeep parked for days, chained up and unmoved, I followed proper procedure to have it removed. I had no knowledge of any covert operations, nor was I informed it was government property. Frankly, I believe I was misled." That's when I stood up. "Misled?" I said loudly. "You cut the lock off a federal vehicle, towed it without authorization, and bragged about it on Facebook." A ripple of murmur swept the room. Karen shot me a glare, but I walked right to the front, pulled a USB drive from my pocket, and handed it to the community center's IT guy who, judging by his smirk, had been waiting all week for this moment. The projector screen lit up. First, ring cam footage of Karen slicing through the lock, gesturing to the tow truck, laughing as the Jeep was dragged away. Then, Facebook screenshots, post after post of Karen boasting about her neighborhood cleanup, mocking comments about military cosplay, and, finally, the kicker, her declaring, "Sometimes you have to break the rules to keep the streets clean." Silence. Greg, one of the board members who usually looked like Karen's shadow, cleared his throat and whispered to the person next to him. Karen looked like she'd just bit into a lemon. She turned back to the crowd, her voice tighter now. "Okay, so maybe I was misinformed about the vehicle's ownership, but it was violating HO standards, and the bylaws give me the authority. No, they don't. came a voice from the side of the room. Everyone turned. Detective Sasha Lynn stepped forward, holding a thick folder. "We've reviewed the HOA charter, removal procedures, and the complete lack of documentation. Not only did you bypass the board, but you failed to notify any enforcement agency, hired an unlicensed tow company, and stored the vehicle in an unauthorized location, all without community approval." Karen opened her mouth, but Sasha continued. "Furthermore, the vehicle was part of a sanctioned joint task force operation. Your actions compromised months of surveillance, damaged sensitive equipment, and caused the premature termination of an active case." Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's face twitched. She turned to the board for help, but they all leaned subtly away, as if trying to dodge the splash zone. Then Greg stood up. "I'd like to make a motion to suspend Linda Farthington from her role as HOA president, pending internal investigation and legal review." Before Karen could respond, another board member stood up. One board member raised their hand and said, "Seconded." A third followed with a quiet, "All in favor?" A unanimous chorus of "aye" echoed through the room. Karen's mouth dropped open. She looked completely blindsided, like the possibility of losing had never even crossed her mind. "You can't do this," she protested, her voice rising. "This is a power grab. I built this HOA. I've served this community for 6 years and destroyed it in one afternoon," I said, stepping back beside Detective Sasha. Karen tried to recover, flipping through her clipboard like paperwork might somehow undo reality. Then, in a move so bold it even startled the legal observers, she pulled out a letter and waved it in the air. "This is a cease and desist order," she declared, "filed by my attorney against the local police department and Mr. Jacobs for entrapment, defamation, and emotional distress. You'll all be hearing from my legal team very soon." Sasha calmly stepped forward, took the letter, glanced at it, and handed it back. "Trent Maxwell? We're familiar. He's already under investigation for misconduct in 3 other HOA-related lawsuits." "Good luck with that." That's when Karen finally seemed to grasp the truth. She was on her own. Even her staunchest supporters, the ones who had backed her vendettas over garden gnomes and non-beige mailboxes, were silent. Rick leaned over and whispered, "Ding dong, the witch is cooked." Karen stormed out, but not before shouting over her shoulder, "You haven't heard the last of this." Once she was gone, the entire atmosphere shifted. The tension lifted. Someone clapped, then another, and before long, the entire room rose to a standing ovation, and not for any one person, but for the fall of a tyrant. Sasha leaned toward me and said, "We're forwarding everything to the DA. There will be charges, maybe not all federal, but she's not walking away clean." I nodded, still processing the fact that it was finally happening. For months, Karen had treated everyone like pawns in her suburban fiefdom, but one reckless move, via cutting a lock and towing the wrong Jeep, had unraveled everything. As the meeting ended, I saw Greg lingering in the back. He walked over, scratching his head. "Hey, listen," he said, a bit awkwardly. "Sorry about all of this. We were afraid to stand up to her. She once threatened to fine me for having a flag on my porch. I told him it was okay." Karen's strongest weapon had always been fear. Once that was gone, she had nothing left. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No sirens, no complaints about my garage door color, no rage-filled emails. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen still had lawyers, and she wasn't the type to vanish quietly. Still, she was off the Thrania, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood could finally breathe. Within 48 hours of her downfall, the story exploded. It started when Rick uploaded the ring cam footage to Reddit's r, entitled "People," with the caption, "HOA Karen cuts lock to impound my neighbor's Jeep. It didn't know it belonged to a federal task force." It hit Reddit's front page in 2 hours. By noon, the video had over 2 million views. By night, Karen's face was all over TikTok, YouTube, and even an angry Twitter thread calling her suburbia's most dangerous tyrant. News vans rolled into the neighborhood like it was the site of a modern HOA revolution. People from other towns showed up just to take selfies in front of the infamous Jeep, which, by then, the police had returned to me, scratched up, but intact. Funny thing, what was once seen as an eyesore had become a local icon. Someone even started a parody GoFundMe called "Save the Tactical Jeep." Jokingly, people donated enough to cover a full repaint. I chose matte black. Fitting, considering it had become a rolling monument to Karen's collapse. Beneath the humor, though, the consequences were still real. The surveillance equipment was ruined, the task force's work had been derailed, and Karen, even suspended, wasn't finished causing trouble. Just days after the meeting, she reappeared like a bad sequel no one asked for. Dressed in a rumpled suit, she held a courthouse press conference flanked by none other than her attorney, Trent Maxwell, the same man Sasha had warned about. He looked like a parody of himself, slicked back hair, huge sunglasses, and a smug grin that screamed, "I've never lost a parking dispute." Trent declared that Karen was the real victim. He accused the police of failing to mark the Jeep as federal property, claimed I had lured her into committing a crime, said the HOA bylaws gave her immunity from municipal or federal oversight. It was laughable. Literally, the local news anchor chuckled halfway through her segment. The legal backlash came fast. The district attorney's office filed official charges: unauthorized towing, destruction of property, obstruction of an investigation, and tampering with surveillance equipment. The feds hadn't indicted Hirieto, but they sent a scathing letter to the HOA demanding full cooperation and laying the blame squarely on her actions. The HOA board, still recovering from the PR firestorm, issued a formal apology. Greg, now acting president, immediately dissolved Karen's beloved violation committee. Residents clapped in the streets like it was the 4th of July. But Karen didn't stop. Her attorney filed a countersuit not just against the HOA, or the city, or the police department, but also against me, claimed I had baited her into misconduct by legally parking a government vehicle on my own property. According to their logic, a visible lock and a properly parked Jeep were somehow irresistible temptations for a legal action. The judge took one look and threw the case out so fast, even the court clerk smirked. Still, the damage was done to Karen's credibility, her reputation, and whatever delusions she had left about being untouchable. And that's when the internet really took over. Karen memes were everywhere. Photoshopped images of Karen started flooding the internet. One had her on a Grand Theft Auto loading screen, bolt cutters in hand, with the caption, "Mission failed, federal charges incoming." Another transformed her rambling press conference into an auto-tuned rap remix, looping the phrase, "I didn't know it was federal." TikTok creators jumped in too, reenacting the Ring camera footage with dramatic lighting and emo music overlays. She was viral, but not the way anyone wants to be. Her name became shorthand for unhinged authority. Teenagers who'd never even lived in HOA neighborhoods started calling their strict parents Karen Farthingtons. But amid the viral chaos, something strange and beautiful started happening in the neighborhood. People were talking again, laughing. It was like a fog had lifted. Lawn chairs appeared on porches, flags flew freely, and kids chalked up sidewalks without anyone citing them for visual disturbances. For the first time since moving in, it actually felt like a community. Rick, always ready to seize a moment, launched a site, HOAWatchdog.net. With help from some neighbors, he built it into a hub for people battling overreaching associations. It gained serious traction, especially after he posted a full timeline of the Jeep incident, ring footage, legal documents, and even a merch section. One popular t-shirt featured Karen's original angry parking note printed across the back. Team Jeep mugs sold out twice. As for the Jeep, the task force eventually replaced all the damaged surveillance tech. To my surprise, they let me keep the new model. Officer Melendez called it a token of appreciation and not quite enough to undo the damage done to their operation, but something. When they handed over the upgraded vehicle blackout tech, reinforced panels, newer systems, I actually laughed. Karen loathed the old Jeep. She would lose her mind if she saw this beast. But the final twist came about a week later. The HOA's insurance company ran an internal audit. Turns out Karen had been filing unapproved expense reports for years. She'd used HOA funds to pay for towing services, hire private contractors, even restock her personal printer ink. Thousands of dollars misused, all hidden under vague line items labeled administrative recovery. The audit report was sent straight to the authorities. Another investigation, at this time for embezzlement, was launched. I was sitting on my porch when Greg walked up and handed me a printed copy. He looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. "She's done," he said. "The state's coming in next week. Might dissolve the HOA entirely if we don't rebuild it from the ground up." I asked him what he thought would happen if it just a broken bar disappeared. Greg shrugged. Maybe we go back to just being neighbors. It sounded simple and powerful, because that's what this whole mess had really been about, a one woman's obsession with control, allowed to fester inside a system that handed her too much power. One impulsive act of cutting a lock on the wrong Jeep had unraveled it all. That night, I pulled the new Jeep into the driveway. Rick had helped me stencil a small, subtle custom label beneath the bumper. Number 1. I parked it exactly where the old one had sat, a front and center. Full tactical view. 2 kids on bikes rode past, grinning and flashing me a thumbs up. I gave them a quick salute. Karen hadn't been seen since her last PR disaster. Her lawyer stopped returning calls. Her house went dark. Rumor was she was trying to sell it, but no one wanted to buy the infamous home of the woman who went to war with the Jeep and lost to the internet. Justice came not just through legal channels, but through memes, laughter, and neighbors finally banding together. The final curtain dropped on a warm Saturday morning, one of those deceptively quiet days. I was sipping coffee on the porch, scrolling through the latest Karen memes, when I saw them. A convoy of 3 black SUVs, 1 sedan, and 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals. They moved with deliberate, silent confidencia like extras from a courtroom drama. They knocked once on Karen's door, waited 30 seconds, then stepped back and announced their presence. She didn't answer. She, probably a Karen, likely knew what was coming. When the marshals arrived, they didn't waste a second. A locksmith was already waiting, and within minutes, her door was open. Some neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Others came right outside with popcorn in hand. It was happening, and the arrest warrant was official. Karen Farthington was being taken into custody. She didn't scream or resist. When she finally stepped into view, her hair was disheveled and her signature red blazer was wrinkled like she'd been living in it. In one hand, she clutched a manila folder, perhaps still hoping there was something inside that could clear her name. But there was no more defense, only the slow, shame-filled walk to the waiting vehicle. Her hands were cuffed in front, her expression one of stunned disbelief, as if this still felt like a minor misunderstanding instead of the culmination of national disgrace and a pile of felony charges. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the end result of 100 entitled choices, each one pushing further until she crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. As the marshals pulled away, a cheer erupted on the block. Out, spontaneous, and deeply satisfying. Rick even set off a couple leftover fireworks from July. That afternoon, Sashalyn arrived to debrief residents. She made a quick stop at my porch and handed over the final list of charges: obstruction, tampering with government property, operating an unlicensed towing business, misuse of community funds, and suspected embezzlement. It read more like the plot of a crime drama than a neighborhood dispute, but the real fallout wasn't just legal, it was structural. The HOA crumbled. Half the board resigned, the other half voted to dissolve the organization entirely rather than face an avalanche of lawsuits. With no one left to enforce it, the infamous rulebook Karen once treated like gospel became nothing more than shredded paper. Greg oversaw the transition, but even he admitted, people were happier now. No more citations, no more nasty notes. People planted wildflowers, painted mailboxes bold colors, and nobody batted an eye. The neighborhood finally felt like it belonged to the residents, not a tyrant in a blazer. As a thank you, the neighbors pooled together to gift me a custom metal sign, reserved for tactical eyesore. We bolted it to the curb where the Jeep always sat. It became a bit of a local landmark. Even the mailman took a selfie with it. But the biggest surprise came the following weekend. Officer Melendez and Sashalyn showed up out of uniform, grinning wide and holding a giant ring of keys. They led me behind the house, where Karen's former impound garage stood. It had been auctioned off after the investigation, and the task force had quietly bought it for the community. But they didn't want to keep it. Melendez handed me the deed. "It's yours now," he said. Figured the guy who got his Jeep stolen during a federal op should decide what gets parked here. I had to sit down to process it. The irony was perfect. The very place Karen had used to assert her control now belonged to me illegally and permanently. I turned it into a community hub, workbenches, a mini repair bay, a wall of donated tools. We called it the garage, open to anyone, veterans, teens working on cars, Dad's fixing bikes. No permits, no approvals, no fines. To christen the space, the task force planned a little surprise. A week later, the entire block was lined with Jeeps, military, civilian, vintage, custom. Veterans from all over the county came. Officers showed up too. We led a slow, honking parade through the neighborhood. Kids waved flags. Parents cheered. Rick live-streamed it all, and it went viral within hours. At the front of the procession was my new Jeep, polished and ready, with Community Watchdog stenciled on the hood. We ended at the garage, where Sasha gave a speech and handed me a plaque that read, "In appreciation for keeping your cool when your hoe went full villain." Everyone laughed, but the truth behind it hit deep. This could have gotten ugly, but instead, it turned into something better. Proof that when people stand together, even the most absurd abuses of power can be undone. Karen eventually accepted a plea deal and no jail time, but she was forced to pay restitution, fined by the state, and banned from ever serving on an HOA board for 20 years. She sold her home quietly and disappeared overnight. No one said goodbye. In the months that followed, the neighborhood thrived. We held cookouts, planted trees, and jokingly renamed ourselves the HOA Estates. The sign stayed out front, the Jeep stayed parked, and Karen became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power without compassion always turns rotten. Looking back, it's wild that this all started over a parked Jeep, but maybe that's the point. Sometimes it doesn't take a huge crime to expose a broken system. Sometimes, all it takes is one bad decision by someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them. Karen thought she was protecting the neighborhood. The truth is, she was the biggest threat to it. And now, every time I fire up the Jeep and hear the engine rumble, I smile, because it's not just a vehicle anymore. It's a symbol, a reminder, and one hell of a story.